Welcome, fellow argument lovers. This is Mark Adam with another episode of Mark Adam Objects. All right, this time we've got a little back and forth between Richard Dawkins and John Lennox. They're discussing the existence or not of God, but to me, neither one does a great job of making their position. Whenever Dawkins talks about religion, it reminds me of someone trying to chew kryptonite. And I've watched a bunch of Lennox do the religious defense, and he never makes a defense. He just makes a claim and then doesn't justify it, and then he makes another claim and doesn't justify it. Anytime anyone probes, he moves to another question and turns it back on him. And my biggest problem is, and this maybe is my imagination, but he seems to do so with a tone and smarminess of like a mother explaining to her kid why they need to wear their winter coat. I think any mediocre debater could take on either one of them and make their arguments look silly. And before I get all the hate comments, I'm not calling mothers that dress their children properly smarmy. I'm saying for that kind of a tone or face being used between two adults having a discussion allows it to be characterized that way. I'm curious to see if you guys feel the same way or think it's time for me to look at going and talking with someone.
Do you really think that the creator of this magnificent edifice of the universe, the expanding universe, the galaxies, he really couldn't think of a better way to get rid of the sins on this one little speck of dust than to have himself tortured? He's the one who's doing the forgiving after all. Couldn't he just have forgiven?
Because this is a moral universe, Richard, and just forgiving doesn't make sense.
Oh, great, John. I'm sure you're going to explain what a moral universe is and why you're sure we're in one.
God sends his Son into the world to provide forgiveness and to provide a basis on which he can justly bring forgiveness to me. Now,
he has to get himself killed in order to do that.
Well, half a minute. We need to step back from this a little bit because it's actually a highly relevant topic.
The necessity of Jesus' torture, humiliation, death, that was a relevant topic. But all you've got is the story, no justification of it. You want to take a step back because you just reached in your quiver and it's already empty.
In your world, where is justice?
Justice is a human construct of great importance in human affairs, and it's something that most of us have a sense of, which I think probably can be given some sort of Darwinian explanation, but I don't see where you're taking this.
Well, my question is there any ultimate justice?
I don't know. Did you want to define ultimate justice? My guess is your definition will be anything that makes it impossible to have ultimate justice without God. Just a wild hunch of mine. But I'll wait for your definition. Oh, you're not going to give one?
I'm saying I find myself in a world which is a broken world. I find myself in a world where there's massive injustice. If there is no God, then there's no ultimate justice. And one of the things that the resurrection transforms for me from pettiness right into center stage is, if this is true, then there's real hope that there be a rational evaluation and fair justice at the end of the world. But atheism doesn't give you that.
If this is true, then arguments come in very handy. Number one, it absolves you of all responsibility to the statement being true. And two, it allows you to complete the sentence with whatever your heart desires. Very unimpressive. The reality is, ultimate justice is a concept. John leaves it undefined, so we have no idea what it means to him. And even if we're on the exact same page, our desire for something or our ability to imagine something has exactly zero to do with its existence. The other thing is, why God? You've presented no more evidence for God than I would if I explained the universe through a giant candy-striped elephant that visited me at night while everyone else was asleep. Without the elephant, there is no ultimate justice. Where's the justice in your non-candy striped elephant world?
Suppose there is no hope, suppose there is no justice, suppose there is nothing but misery and darkness and bleakness, suppose there is nothing that we would wish for, nothing that we would hope for. Too bad. That doesn't make it true just because God would make us feel good.
Well, of course it doesn't.
Well, then why do you bring that argument up?
Because I believe that there is evidence that it is true. I don't believe in the resurrection just like that. Because faith is based on evidence.
Maybe it's rude to inquire, but are we ever going to talk about any of the evidence? Is that for next year's debate? These next few statements from John are some of my favorite. For some reason, he thinks he has a mic drop moment explaining how Richard is made of matter that can be studied, but he can't get to know Richard's personality unless he reveals it to him. Okay. Then watch him try to turn that blather into an actual point, and he almost chokes on it. And when he can't tie anything together, he just goes with, it makes perfect sense to me. Perfect sense to you is not an argument.
But anyway,
but therefore the question to be decided then is there a God, and has he revealed himself? And that's where, again, I think this pettiness needs to be pushed aside, because I can't get to know you as a person. You're not just a scientific object. I could look at you through a telescope or a magnifying glass. I could even dissect you and so on and so forth. But because you are a person, I cannot get to know you unless you're prepared to reveal yourself to me. So the fact that the claim of Christ to be the truth, to be God incarnate, that makes perfect sense to me, because if there is a God who invented this wonderful, marvelous universe with all its science and all the rest, then he has taken the initiative in getting to know us and revealing himself to us. And he's revealed himself to us at the level we can understand. We're persons, he's a person. That at least makes sense.
Most of us know the story of Jesus and the stories in the Bible. What Richard is trying to have is a conversation on the validity of the stories. Why would they make sense? And all John does is tell more and more of the story without ever justifying any of it. I'm glad he believes, but he does nothing to convince other people to. John keeps talking about what makes sense to him, but in a debate, your responsibility is to show why it makes sense, not just name it and then say it makes sense to you. The tea parties with my daughter make perfect sense to her, but that doesn't mean we were drinking tea. You claim he has taken the initiative to get to know us. I'm just wondering if there was a block party that you were invited to that I don't know about, or, I mean, that's completely possible. Didn't God talk directly to people before? Abraham, Moses, Noah, people like that? But this time, creating and torturing Jesus was the ticket. And maybe so, but you haven't justified anything. And this may be neither here nor there, but if this was God's plan, I got to kind of facepalm at the results, since over 2/3 of the world's population aren't Christian.
Reading your book, The God Delusion, you say that it's under scholarly dispute among historians that Jesus actually existed. Now, I checked with the ancient historians. That is not so.
Apparently, there's only 3 of them, and they're all part of John's Friday night bingo group.
I mean, if you could possibly persuade me that there was some kind of creative force in the universe, there was some kind of physical, mathematical genius who created everything, the expanding universe, devised quantum theory, relativity, and all that. You could possibly persuade me of that. But that is radically and fundamentally incompatible with the sort of God who cares about sin, the sort of God who is interested, who has the slightest interest in your private thoughts and wickednesses and things like that.
Got to get on Richard here. If God is infinitely powerful, then he's not incompatible with anything. And if he is, certainly Richard hasn't demonstrated so. Excuse me. It's not logical for Richard to point to the universe from the galaxies all the way down to quantum physics and pretend God can't be concerned about the little things. If he built the universe for us and he wants to care about our thoughts and our sins, then he'll care about our thoughts and our sins. How does Richard Dawkins know better?
I find the contrast between standing tall in a silent and cold universe with no hope, believing that your moral sense must ultimately be illusion, you're crying for justice because most people will never get it, because death ends everything. The contrast between that and enjoying the friendship, the personal friendship of God, and knowing that ultimate justice will be done, is immense.
Well,
but the basic question is it true or not?
Yeah, that is the basic question. It is completely irrelevant if it's comforting, if it gives you hope, if it gives you happiness. That has nothing to do with whether it's true.
That I agree with entirely.
So if you're going to say that Jesus was born of a virgin, that Jesus walked on water, that he turned water into wine, that is palpably anti-scientific. There is no evidence for that.
Jesus actually claimed to be the Logos that created the whole universe. And if this is the Creator incarnate, making water into wine and so on is really a triviality. The more fundamental thing is the fact that he claimed to be and gave evidence that he was God.
How many times can this motherfucker say evidence and not give any? And I bet it'd be news to most Christians that the miracles and signs were just trivialities. But I'm here to learn.
Anti-scientific. I don't think it's anti-scientific at all. Science cannot say that miracles do not occur. It can say they're highly improbable. But nobody is claiming that these things occurred by natural processes. They occurred because God fed his power in.
What I mean by that is that if, and when doing science, we constantly have to keep in mind that at any moment there might be a little magic trick slipped in. That would completely nullify the whole enterprise of science.
Ancient historians, many of them, even at the skeptical end of the spectrum, say that the evidence for the resurrection of Christ is very powerful. The explosion of the Christian church from a non-proselytizing group of Jews in the first century,
Lord, it's a miracle!
Holy shit, I cannot believe it. Something persuasive, you might even call evidence, from the smug blowhard who thinks his word should be just accepted by everybody. But this is good. Despite what I said before about 2/3 of the world's population not being Christian, to go from nothing to a following of over 2 billion people demands respect and explanation in a way that nothing John has said thus far does at all. I don't expect much more, but that won't tarnish this wonder.
So we have to ask ourselves, are we prepared to believe in historical testimony or not?
Well, you must talk to different historians than the one I talk to, but in any case, I still come back to the point that you cannot do science if at any time you remember that famous cartoon of the...
Oh, I do. And therefore a miracle happens in the middle of the equation, yes.
I mean, that is deeply against the spirit of science, and I don't think I could do science if I thought that at any time something like the resurrection, something like the virgin birth was going to be smuggled in by a godly caprice.
Again, I'm disappointed in Richard here. How can he have a problem with John justifying God by saying it's the better of two scenarios, and then turn around and doubt God because it might make his science a little harder? Final judgment doesn't exist just because John wants it to, and it doesn't not exist because it would somehow be inconvenient for Richard.
I suppose the basic question for me here is, what is the nature of ultimate reality? If ultimate reality is simply the universe, in some sense, or multiverse, that's one thing. And I am at a loss to understand how you get from simple atoms, elementary particles, and so on, to a brain, let alone a mind, the I, the person, and we don't understand what consciousness is, and so on. I don't begin to see, and I don't think scientists begin to see, how you can get to something that even understands the concept of meaning.
Of course they can. It's called millions of years of evolution and natural selection. Perhaps you've heard of them? For all we know, consciousness is just the best way for our genes to get passed on.
Life finds a way.
But I can understand it if behind the universe, the ultimate reality is not impersonal matter and energy that somehow has produced all this stuff bottom up. I can understand it if it's top down.
Just because John doesn't understand it otherwise means absolutely nothing. It's easy to just pass the buck to some invisible being in the sky, but it's not proof that it's true.